Jnanam paramam dhyayam. Knowledge is supreme.
In the last lecture, we defined mass transport coefficient if there is no reaction, and we looked at how to write mole balance in the thin film that may be present right at the surface of the catalyst pellet when the bulk fluid is flowing past the catalyst pellet. We assume that the film is extremely small, extremely thin film, much smaller than the diameter of the catalyst pellet, and therefore, we actually assumed that the film is actually planar in nature. We neglected the curvature, and in this lecture we will look at how to find out what is the mass transport coefficient given the hydrodynamic conditions. So, we particularly want to understand how to estimate this quantity called Kc, which is the mass transport coefficient, which basically if the mass transport coefficient is known, we can find out what is the flux with which the species actually is diffusing or reaching the surface of the catalyst pellet. Now, this mass transport coefficient is similar to the heat transport coefficient for heat transfer problems. So, let us now contrast and see what is the heat transport coefficient in a heat transport problem. So, the flux of heat transport in a specific location, let us say for the same system through the film, would essentially be some heat transport coefficient multiplied by the temperature at bulk minus the temperature of the surface. So, if I now compare the flux relationship with the concentration gradient and the heat transport flux with the temperature gradient, then I can see that the mass transport coefficient that appears here is very similar to the heat transport coefficient, where the heat transfer is actually occurring across the same boundary layer through which the mass transport is occurring. So, from the heat transport class, we know that there is a boundary layer analogy. One can capitalize on boundary layer analogy to find the mass transport coefficient, Kc. Now, if we know how to find heat transport coefficient, then there are correlations which are present to estimate heat transport coefficient, and the correlations are very similar for mass transport coefficient because of the boundary layer analogy that is present in the boundary layer for heat and mass transport, the boundary layer analogy for heat and mass transport in the boundary layer. So, there are dimensionless quantities that are correlated which can be used to find the heat transport coefficient H. Now, what are these dimensionless quantities? The typical dimensionless quantities are what is called as the Nusselt number. The typical symbol used is Nu, and what is Nusselt number? It is essentially the heat transport coefficient H multiplied by the particle diameter divided by the conductivity of the fluid. So, if we know Nusselt number for a boundary layer problem, we actually can estimate what is the heat transport coefficient for that particular problem. And then another dimensionless number is the Reynolds number, which essentially characterizes the flow of the fluid past the object, which is given by u, which is the velocity and density of the fluid multiplied by the particle diameter divided by the viscosity of the fluid. One can rewrite this as u into dP divided by what is called as a kinematic viscosity, which is essentially given by mu by rho. So one can write Reynolds number in terms of u rho dP by mu or u dP by nu, which is the kinematic viscosity. Both these are same. And there is the third number, which is basically the Prandtl number. What is Prandtl number? Prandtl number is given by Cp mu by K, where Cp is the capacity of the fluid, mu is the viscosity and Kt is the conductivity of the fluid. Now one can multiply and divide by density, and we can rewrite this as mu by rho into 1 by Kt by rho Cp. What is Kt by rho Cp? Kt by rho Cp is essentially a thermal diffusivity and mu by rho is the kinematic viscosity. So therefore, we can now rewrite Prandtl number as nu by alpha. So Nusselt number is h dP by k, Reynolds number is u dP by nu, and Prandtl number is essentially nu by alpha, which is the thermal diffusivity of the fluid. Now how are these three correlated? For a spherical particle where fluid is actually flowing past a sphere, the correlation that connects these three dimensionless quantities is essentially given by Nusselt number is equal to 2.0 plus 0.6 into Reynolds number to the power of half into Prandtl number to the power of 1 by 3. So if we know Reynolds number, which essentially characterizes the flow properties. So if we know the flow properties, then we can actually estimate the Reynolds number, and if we know the physical properties of the fluid that is being used for flow past the sphere, we can estimate the Prandtl number. So once we know the Prandtl number, then from this correlation we can actually estimate what is the Nusselt number for that particular system where the fluid is actually flowing past a sphere. So once we know Nusselt number, from Nusselt number we can find out that h is essentially given by the conductivity of the fluid multiplied by the Nusselt number divided by the particle diameter. So once we know the Nusselt number, we can actually find out what is the heat transport coefficient. Now this correlation is actually valid for wide range of Reynolds number. If the sphere is actually in a stagnant fluid, that is Reynolds number is equal to 0, then Nusselt number is essentially given by 2, where the second term is actually vanishes because Reynolds number is 0. And for a system where the fluid is actually flowing at a reasonable velocity but laminar, so for large Re but still laminar conditions, the Nusselt number is essentially approximately given by 0.6 into Re to the power of half into Prandtl to the power of 1 by 3. This is because Reynolds number is sufficiently large that this 2 is actually much smaller than the second term. So Nusselt number can essentially be approximated as 0.6 into Reynolds number to the power of half into Prandtl number to the power of 1 by 3. Now we know that from boundary layer analogy, the heat and mass transport processes are similar. In the boundary layer. So which means that there must be an equivalent dimensionless quantity for each of the three dimensionless numbers that we have seen for heat transport. Because the processes are similar, there must be characteristically similar dimensionless quantities. So let us look at what these quantities are. So Nusselt number in heat transport, the corresponding number in mass transport is what is called as a Sherwood number. Sherwood number, and Reynolds number is essentially characterizing the hydrodynamic conditions, and that is going to be same as what is used for mass transport as well. In heat transport, Reynolds number characterizes the hydrodynamics, and the same hydrodynamic properties would also characterize mass transport. So, it is the same dimensionless quantities that is used, and Prandtl number, which essentially captures the thermal diffusivity of the fluid which is through which the heat transport is occurring. In a similar fashion, there will be Schmidt number, which essentially characterizes the diffusion of species through the fluid. So, let us look at what is Sherwood number and what is Schmidt number. So, Sherwood number SH is essentially given by mass transport coefficient Kc multiplied by the particle diameter dP divided by the equimolar counter diffusivity DAB. Contrast this with the Nusselt number, where you have heat transport coefficient H multiplied by dP divided by the diffusivity of the species. So, clearly you can see that there is a similarity between these two numbers, where this captures heat transport coefficient and here you have mass transport coefficient, and here you have conductivity, which is a signature of the thermal diffusion, and here you have mass diffusivity, which is capturing the diffusivity of the species in the fluid. Let us next look at what is this Schmidt number. Schmidt number is essentially given by nu divided by DAB, and contrast that with Prandtl number, which is nu divided by alpha, which is thermal diffusivity. So, in place of thermal diffusivity, kinematic viscosity essentially captures the flow properties, and mu alpha is essentially capturing the thermal diffusion properties. So, now we can, it is the same hydrodynamic conditions that could be used for mass transport as well. So, we essentially have to replace alpha, which is the thermal diffusion, with the corresponding equimolar counter diffusivity. Now, because of this boundary layer analogy and because of the similarity in these dimensionless numbers, we can actually see that the correlation that is used for heat transport is actually can be directly ported to mass transport as well, and therefore, the Sherwood number can be related as 2 plus 0.6 into Reynolds number to the power of half into Schmidt number to the power of 1 by 3. So, one can actually use this correlation if we know Reynolds number, which essentially characterizes the hydrodynamic conditions, and this characterizes the mass transport and the kinematic viscosity, which actually has the mass diffusion and kinematic viscosity. Then we can actually use these numbers to find out what is the Sherwood number. So, if we know Sherwood number, we can find out that the mass transport coefficient is essentially given by diffusivity into Sherwood number divided by the particle diameter. So, therefore, from boundary layer analogy, we should be able to estimate what is the mass transport coefficient for a given hydrodynamic condition once the properties of the system are actually known. Now, this correlation is what is classically called as Froehsling correlation. And we will be using this Froehsling correlation extensively in the mass transport coefficient calculations for all these problems. Now, let us look at how these numbers look like. Let us take a specific example of mass transport without reaction. Let us take a specific example problem where a fluid is actually flowing past a sphere, and let us say that the diameter of the particle is about 0.01 meters, or essentially 1 centimeter, and this problem has actually been taken from the textbook Fogler, page number 776. So, suppose let us say that the reaction is instantaneous. Let us assume that the reaction is actually instantaneous, and if the concentration of the species in bulk is equal to 1 mole per decimeter cube, which is essentially 10 power 3 moles per meter cube, and if we assume that the fluid velocity is essentially 0.1 meters per second, and the properties of the fluid essentially are, if we say that the property of the fluids are, the kinematic viscosity is 0.5 into 10 power minus 6 meter square per second, and the equimolar counter diffusivity of the species is essentially equal to 10 to the power of minus 10 meter square per second. So, we need to find out what is the mass transport coefficient Kc. How do we find this? We know that there is a correlation relating Sherwood number, which captures the mass transport coefficient, and the Reynolds number and Schmidt number. So, let us use the Froehsling correlation. So, in order to use the Froehsling correlation, what are the quantities we need to estimate? We need to find Sherwood number, we need to find Reynolds number, and we need to find Schmidt number. So, these are the three quantities we need to estimate in order to use the correlation. So, let us estimate the Sherwood number first. So, Sherwood number, we need to find out what Sherwood number is. So, we need to essentially estimate what Reynolds number is and what Schmidt number is, and we need to find out what is the Sherwood number. So, let us try to find out what is Reynolds number. Reynolds number is given by U times dP divided by nu, which is equal to 0.1 into 0.01 divided by 0.5 into 10 power minus 6, which is equal to 2000, approximately equal to 2000, and then Schmidt number is equal to nu by dAB, which is equal to 0.5 into 10 power minus 6 divided by 10 to the power of minus 10, which is essentially equal to 5000. So, we can now plug this into the Froehsling correlation. So, Sherwood number is equal to 2 plus 0.6 into Reynolds number to the power of half into Schmidt number to the power of 1 by 3. So, that is equal to 2 plus 0.6 into 2000 to the power of half into 5000 to the power of 1 by 3. So, from here we will see that Sherwood number is equal to 460.7, and we can actually estimate the mass transport coefficient, which is 460.7 into particle diameter is 0.01 divided by 0.01 into 10 power minus 10, and that is essentially equal to, if we estimate this is equal to 4.61 into 10 to the power of minus 6 meters per second. So, that is the mass transport coefficient for the problem, for the system that is actually specified in this problem. So, now from the mass transport coefficient we can now estimate what is the flux with which the species is actually diffusing through the boundary layer. So, the flux essentially is given by mass transport coefficient multiplied by the concentration difference, but we assume that the reaction is actually an instantaneous reaction. So, what happens if the reaction is instantaneous? As soon as the species comes to the surface of the catalyst where the active material may be present, then the reaction will instantaneously happen, which means that all the species which is available for the reaction at the surface would actually undergo complete conversion. So, which essentially translates to the fact that the concentration CAS is essentially equal to 0. So, the surface concentration will be 0, which means that there is no species that will be present right at the surface at any point in time, because the reaction is actually an instantaneous reaction where all species present or available at any moment would actually be consumed completely. So, therefore, from here we know what Kc is. Kc is 4.61 into 10 to the power of minus 6 multiplied by the concentration is 10 to the power of 3 moles per meter cube, and from here we can see that the flux essentially is equal to 4.61 into 10 power minus 3 moles per meter square second. Now, in fact, by definition of the rate at which the reaction happens per unit surface area, which is essentially the moles of the species that is consumed per unit surface area of the catalyst per time, is essentially equal to the same quantity which is here. So, this is nothing but minus RAS defined per, this is the rate that is actually rate at which the species is consumed per unit surface area of the catalyst. So, therefore, the flux with which the species diffuses to the catalyst surface is equal to the rate at which the species reacts is equal to the rate at which the species actually is reacting per unit surface area of the catalyst, and this is for the instantaneous reaction. So, now next let us look at how do we improve the mass transport coefficient. So, is it possible to improve the mass transport coefficient? So, suppose there is no reaction, then how do we improve the mass transport coefficient? The Sherwood number correlation, the Frost-Link correlation actually gives us an idea of how to actually improve the mass transport coefficient. So, let us look at the Sherwood number, Frost-Link correlation. Of 1 by 3. So, from here if we substitute the expressions for the Reynolds number and Schmidt number, we will find that this is equal to 2 plus 0.6 into u dp by nu to the power of half into Schmidt number, which is nu by dAB to the power of 1 by 3. And this is nothing but this is nothing but mass transport coefficient Kc into particle diameter divided by dAB. So, from here we can write that Kc is equal to dAB by dP into 2 plus 0.6 into dAB by dP into u dP by nu to the power of half into nu by dAB to the power of 1 by 3. So, if I estimate the mass transport coefficient and if the Reynolds number is reasonably large for this system, we can clearly see that the Reynolds number is of the order of 2000. So, the Reynolds number is, if we see for this problem, we will see that the Reynolds number is of the order of 2000, which is actually sufficiently a large value. And so, if the Reynolds number is sufficiently large, then Kc can be approximately written as 0.6 into dAB by dP multiplied by u dP by nu to the power of half into nu by dAB to the power of 1 by 3. So, we can now rewrite this slightly in a different fashion. So, if we now regroup the terms that is present here, we can rewrite this expression as Kc is equal to 0.6 into dAB to the power of dAB to the power of 2 by 3 divided by nu to the power of 1 by 6 multiplied by u to the power of half divided by dP to the power of half. So, what is interesting in this expression is that this first term here dAB to the power of 2 by 3 by 1 by 6, this essentially captures the physical properties of the species and the fluid that is actually carrying the species, the diffusivity of the species and the kinematic viscosity. And if I now look at the second term here, this essentially captures the hydrodynamic conditions and the particle diameter. So, now I can actually ask a question, how should I change the velocity in order to change my mass transport coefficient? So, I can specifically ask even a better question, where can I do something to this term, to physical properties, in order to change the mass transport coefficient, and can I do something to the hydrodynamic conditions to change the mass transport coefficient? Now, what do these physical properties depend upon? These depend primarily on the temperature and pressure. So, if I operate at different temperatures, let us say I increase the temperature at which the reaction is being conducted, at which the diffusion of the species is happening, then I can essentially increase my diffusivity of the species and thereby I can actually increase the mass transport coefficient. But much easier way to do this would actually be to change the hydrodynamic conditions, because changing hydrodynamic conditions would actually require pumping the fluid at a higher flow rate, which results in a higher velocity, that is different value of u. So, let us look at what happens if the fluid flows at twice the velocity. What is the enrichment, what is the increase in the mass transport coefficient that can be achieved? So, we can answer this question. So, suppose let us say we define Kc1, let us say we define Kc1 as the mass transport coefficient at let us say velocity u1, and so that is essentially given by 0.6 into dAb to the power of 2 by 3 divided by nu to the power of 1 by 6 multiplied by u1 to the power of half into dP to the power of half. So, if I now just increase the velocity by keeping all other properties constant, such as the diffusivity or the kinematic viscosity or the particle diameter, let us say that I calculate what is the mass transport coefficient at another velocity, let us say u2, which is given by 0.6 into dAb to the power of 2 by 3 divided by nu to the power of 1 by 6 into u2 to the power of half divided by dP to the power of half. Suppose let us say that I am actually finding out what is the mass transport coefficient at a different velocity. Let us say that u2 is equal to 2 times u1. Let us say that u2 is equal to 2 times u1. Now, I can find out that Kc2 by Kc1, if I take the ratio of these two expressions here, this is essentially equal to u2 by u1 to the power of half, because all other terms are same. I conduct the reaction at the same size of the catalyst spread. The only change that I do is I increase the speed with which the fluid is actually flowing and actually double the speed. So, this is nothing but 2 to the power of half, and that is nothing but approximately equal to 1.41. So, what you essentially get is that Kc2 is equal to 1.41 times Kc1, which means that there is a 41% increase in the mass transport coefficient. So, by doubling the velocity with which the fluid is flowing, one can actually achieve a 41% increase in the mass transport coefficient, provided the Reynolds number is sufficiently large. But even if it is not sufficiently large, such a what is the nature of increase in the mass transport coefficient can actually be estimated even if the Reynolds number is very large by using the complete Frost-Link correlation. So, what we have seen in today's lecture is we essentially looked at how to estimate mass transport coefficient, and we essentially observed that we can capitalize on the heat and mass transport process analogy that is present in the boundary layer, because these two processes actually occur in a similar fashion. And so, the correlation which is available for estimating the heat transport coefficient can actually be capitalized and can be used in a similar fashion for estimating the mass transport coefficient. And we particularly looked at Frost-Link correlation, which is meant for the estimating the mass transport coefficient for fluid flowing past a sphere. And we also observed that if we use this correlation, we can see that there is an increase in the mass transport coefficient that can be achieved by changing the hydrodynamic conditions, that is the velocity with which the fluid is actually flowing. Thank you.